Hi, my name is Jessica Fowler, and I'm International Relations Concentration, as Halima pointed out. And we really approached the analysis of the GPI, the Global Peace Index, from a couple different perspectives, because IR is very broad. The students participating, we kind of came from a security perspective, a international policy and diplomacy perspective, as well as a state and domestic policy and perspective. In regards to the two questions that we considered overall, we came up with a couple of main points that we kept coming back to, and suggestions as well as recommendations. Firstly, we kind of commented on how the GPI can be applied to policymaking and practice from the IR perspective, and we talked a lot about the extent or the importance of looking at specific scores versus simply the ranks, something that came up earlier in our discussion with Steve Killalea, a student brought up, and how this focus in this way on more specific levels of the indicators, kind of unraveling the domestic the levels of the indicators on the domestic level could indicate more specific targets for domestic policy was important, and how this kind of in our mind led to a more targeted attention and diplomacy on these specific issues. And in turn, I think Mrs. Randall also talked to how this could be targeted towards aid policy as well, on a domestic aid policy level and international aid policy level. We then kind of talked about how this idea of really using and leveraging the regional organizations was important in supporting this and pushing this initiative further. For us, this came up because we thought that these regional organizations, such as these multinational and representative organizations such as the AU, the EU, ASEAN, we really saw that these would give more of, it would kind of safeguard the perspective of impartiality and objectivity of the index, and give it really not so much a north-south perspective, but really give it an overall impartial perspective. And they would have a lot more, they'd have a lot more leverage with their regional members and the states that were included in those bodies. So along those lines as well, we thought that these organizations could use the GPI as a potential benchmark for their member states, as well as a kind of good standing implication, and pressure the pressure that these organizations could imply kind of on the states and the regions that they oversee. As well, we kind of came up with this concept or measure that could aid in this, which we called the For Progress Initiative. It was just kind of a little name we gave to it. But it was the idea that these actors could encourage improvement on these indicators with connected implications for opportunities for further economic development and growth, as well as support of various forms of state building. Kind of a show improvement in areas, and we can help you in those areas as you're showing improvement, helping support in that way. To this end as well, we envision a type of progress report over time, which has been mentioned in a couple of the presentations. A kind of longitudinal study maybe. I know it's a young program, it's only been 4 years, and I'm sure this is the implication in the long run, is to have a trend, to see reports that report this trend setting. So this idea, though, we did want to point out the importance of it being non-self-reporting as well, or to some degree non-self-reporting, having observation groups come in, outside groups come in to do the observations, but also possibly embedding a level of self-reporting as well, but having oversight over that. And we came up to this end as well with something called C2P, Commit for Peace. It's kind of this idea of branding peace, or kind of normalizing this idea of the GPI and this idea of an index for peace. And so secondly, we discussed the possible additional metrics that could or should be considered with the GPI. And just to briefly list them, we talked about the differing levels of discrimination and xenophobia that were mentioned earlier, and how these weren't necessarily addressed in the index per se. And I think this goes a long way to just kind of address the different issues within states, and how you need to look at not only reported and observed, but also perceived levels of discrimination and xenophobia within states. And along these lines as well, levels of inclusion and integration, which go along with the looking at refugees and immigration issue. We also wanted to thought there should be some kind of inclusion of a measure of transition as well, which has been mentioned by Kathleen and by the presenters as well, that there should be some type of indicator that is indicating a transition or change over time in the indicators. This change from negative peace to positive peace is what we've kind of discussed before, this Galtung idea of just the lack of violence to having substantial structures for harmonious societies and more positive peace. So to this end, we saw indicators such as domestic laws passed, international treaties ratified, UN participation beyond just peacekeeping, which I believe is one of the only indicators on that end, and regional interaction beyond just relationships, but actual interaction and participation between regional actors, and increases in investment to kind of address that business side of things, as well as policies in progress or on the table. Were those taken into consideration? Policies that had not passed per se, but were being discussed within a state. And that kind of wraps up, I guess, the indicators that we thought would be additionally helpful to the index. And just overall, our perspective, I think, was that to ensure the inclusion and application of the GPI effectively, it's really going to hinge on these key regional actors to support it and push it with their membership states.